I'm Chris Carter, the Locked On Steelers podcast. On today's episode, we're going to talk about why deep passing is going to be a lot bigger of a factor in the Steelers offense than some might think. That and Mock Draft Monday. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you go ahead and show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Hope everyone had a great weekend. I'm going to dig into some stuff to start this week. We get ever so closer to the draft. It's coming up. We do have a mock draft Monday picks coming up, but I want to take a step back and talk about a factor of this potential Steelers offense that's brewing that we haven't really discussed that much of. And that's the deep passing game that could be there for either Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. Now, some people might think, well, wait a second, Chris, we've been talking about this being a run team and a run first team and the defense winning. And yes, absolutely, still that. But one of the biggest factors to opening up the run game is being able to hit on the deep ball to force safeties and corners and linebackers to not be as aggressive, to understand like, hey, we can't just rush the line of scrimmage and try to take away the run game because they can hit us with deep balls. Now, someone might think, well, Chris, Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, what are they going to do when it comes to the deep ball? And if you look at the numbers last year, Russell Wilson and Justin Fields both ranked in the top 10 in deep passing passer rating. And literally, Justin Fields was 7th best. Russell Wilson was 8th best. Now, this isn't just, that doesn't say, oh my God, well, they're the best passers in the world, but it's a look at like, hey, when they threw the ball deep last year, they did it at a pretty efficient rate. Justin Fields completed 23 of 52 deep passes through 8 touchdowns. And again, a deep pass is officially when you go over 20 yards or more. So you're throwing down the field. Justin Fields, again, 8 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Russell Wilson, 6 touchdowns to 1 interception. Pretty good ratios there as far as getting the ball down the field, choosing when to throw the ball down the field, and getting the ball to those receivers. And Justin Fields, good rate there. I think that was actually his best rate that he had of his 3-year career. And not sure if that'll just replicate for the Steelers, but at least a good sign there. But Russell Wilson is a more interesting case because that wasn't a one-off for Russell Wilson. In fact, Russell Wilson, when I look back over his stats as far as passer rating and where he ranked in the NFL when, with passer rating, when it came to just deep passes, he has been in the top 12 of passer rating of quarterbacks who throw deep balls for 10 straight seasons. Now, a little caveat, it has to be at least 18 deep passes because technically, one player can come on the field, hit on a bomb and have the perfect passer rating. But basically for quarterbacks that are starters who regularly throw deep passes for a large chunk of the season, literally every year dating back to 2014 was the first. No, excuse me. 2014 was when it started. He has been in the top 12 as far as quarterbacks when it comes to deep passer rating. And that's impressive. Some of those years he was 12, some of the years he was like 10, but quite a few of those years he was in the top 10. In fact, one of those years in 2019, he was the best deep passer. He threw 15 touchdowns and 1 interception. That was the highest passer rating of 129.8 on deep balls in that season. Excuse me, that was 2018, not 2019. But in 2019, he was 3rd best with 12 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Now, granted, those are a few years ago, and he's a different person now. But even last year when he was with the Broncos and they were struggling, again, 6 touchdowns, 1 interception, 818 yards when it came to deep passing, a passer rating of 112.5. The Steelers haven't had that kind of a deep thrower in quite some time. And you're probably thinking, well, wait a second, Chris, what about Arthur Smith's offense? Is it going to have, is it going to call upon that? Is it going to put put the quarterback in that kind of a situation? Because we've talked about running the ball. And again, yes, they are going to run the ball, but part of running the ball is also going to be calling play action and setting up the shot plays to try to take advantage of defenses that want to get a little aggressive against the run. And if you're wondering, well, has Arthur Smith ever improved someone's deep passer ratings? I direct you back to his work in Tennessee with none other than Ryan Tannehill, who, when you look out through most of his career, he is very average to below average pass or deep passing numbers. But in the 2 years that he played for Arthur Smith, those are the only 2 years in his career where his passer rating was over 100 on his deep passing. In 2019, he completed not a great rate at 33% of his deep passes, but 5 touchdowns to 1 interception, a passer rating of 108. In 2020, it was 6 touchdowns to 3 interceptions, 19 of 42 completions. They're a higher completion percentage, less, not as good a touchdown to interception ratio, but another deep passer rating of 101.7. You look throughout his entire career, there aren't any 2 other years that are as good as those years, and those were the 2 years that Ryan Tannehill had Arthur Smith. Now, again, this is not to say that the Steelers are just going to be bombs away of an offense, but it's would be helpful to have those type of splash plays again in the offense. We haven't seen that be a part of the Steelers offense for years now. And back when it was an asset, back when it was either Martavis Bryant or even like rookie Chase Claypool in the first half of that 2020 season, it opened up so much for the rest of the offense, because when teams had to worry about that, they could not afford to, try to double cover underneath receivers as much. They couldn't commit as much to, say, like the tight end position, or commit to the run as much, because as a defense, you cannot allow just the big shot to just make it easy for teams to score. And the Steelers they haven't been a deep passing team for quite some time, since Ben Roethlisberger, in early part of 2020, Ben Roethlisberger was slinging it until his knees started to give out, and that led to him kind of falling into the old man version of Big Ben that he finished his career with. But back when, even go back as far back as when they had Mike Wallace, you remember how dangerous that made the Steelers offense? It made it to teams they had to. Mike Wallace was there. I remember there was a time when Mike Wallace was starting to get compared to Calvin Johnson, and he was not on that level, but he was a talented speedster who, with that home run skill and Ben Roethlisberger's cannon of an arm and his ability to connect on the deep ball, it changed the offense. It made the offense much more dynamic and opened up so many more opportunities. And I think that's what this Steelers offense is going to want to do at times. You have to pick the right spot to do it. It's not going to be a bombs away offense where they're throwing 50 deep balls a game. But if they're efficient when they do so, if they find ways to make smart deep throws that put their receivers in good positions to win and then finish plays, those are the things that can make an offense that is trying to base itself in the run game, that is trying to win the line of scrimmage more often, that is trying to, force a defense to get into guessing games. Are we running the ball at you and you have to commit to more guys to help on, at the line of scrimmage, or are we calling play action? Or are we going deep and we testing your ability to run with our best receivers deep down the field? If that's the balance of the offense, it seems, at least to me, like the 2 quarterbacks that they got through, trades and free agency, Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, are 2 guys that show the ability to get the ball there and to get the ball there in smart ways. Justin Fields has a cannon of an arm. And I'm not sure, I wouldn't say Russell Wilson has a cannon, but I think that he knows, in just his career of me watching him and me studying him, he knows when to try the deep ball and when to go for it. And I think that's where the Steelers haven't had that in their offense for some time. If the Steelers do get that from either one of these guys, whoever ends up being the starter, I think it puts them in the position to have big splash plays that open up the entire offense and make a lot more big plays and make it easier for this offense to put up points, which it hasn't been easy to do for some time. That's something that I think that people aren't talking enough about. And I think it's something that if we keep an eye on moving forward, that it could end up becoming a big part of the Steelers offense. But to have a deep passing game, you don't just need a quarterback, you need wide receivers to pull it off. And George Pickens is kind of your one guy there. Calvin Austin has speed, but who else can the Steelers add to that? We look back at this draft class again to look over the top 25 receivers that I ranked and see which of those receivers make the most sense to add if you're looking for a deep ball threat, especially in the earlier rounds. All that here and more on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the place that you go to make buying tickets to your favorite events with a non-stressful event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all your sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. Just download the Game Time app right in your phone or go to their website, gametime.co. They give you killer deals on last-minute tickets, and they have a best price guarantee that can't be beat. You can also save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for events, whether they're sporting events, concerts, and so many more things. The Game Time app also offers you exclusive in-app deals to give you even more savings, and all the prices are upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. With baseball season here, Game Time is a great way to make sure you find the best seats to watch the Pirates and get the best view at a beautiful PNC Park here in Pittsburgh. The Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section in a row for less somewhere else, Game Time credits you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase, or go to the website gametime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's continue our discussion here about making the deep passing game part of the Steelers' arsenal in 2024. And like I said, they're going to need more playmakers in the receiver room to help with that. And with that, I think it's important to look at the players in this class that make the most sense to try to add there and where they could potentially get them. Now, if you remember last week, we had Derek Bell, an awesome Steelers analyst, an awesome film analyst in the NFL. He's been breaking things down. He gave us his look at his top 20 wide receivers in this class, and I realized someone was like, "Man, these rankings, this and that," and I realized I forgot to include my rankings. So I'm going to include some of them here right now. In fact, I've listed up to 25. Actually, these are the old ones. 1 second, let me update these real quick for the show. But I've listed out just the top 25 guys that I think that at least right now, and these are subject to change just based off of what we're seeing overall. But when we're looking at the top 25 guys, there's obviously guys at the top of the list that are the Steelers aren't going to be able to get Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors. We do know the Steelers at least talked to Rome Odunze of Washington in at the combine, but we've talked about this, and we talked about it with Derek Bell about who the Steelers, could most likely target if they wanted to go in the first round. And the two names that he and I kept talking about were Adonai Mitchell and Brian Thomas Jr. Adonai Mitchell is a personal favorite for mine. I just think he's a really good route runner. If he puts it all together, he could be a really dangerous receiver. But a guy that a lot of people have been linking to the Steelers, and who also did have a formal interview at the combine with at the Steelers, is Brian Thomas Jr. And that is a very interesting place to look at there, is to see if they can get him, because when you look at deep threats, if we're talking about adding deep threat players, Brian Thomas Jr. had the most touchdown catches on deep balls last year. He had 12 total. He also caught 68% of his deep passes when he was throwing the ball over 20 yards down the field. He was targeted 22 times in those situations, caught 15 of them. That's a very good rate, and that's actually one of the best rates in the country as far as touchdowns go. Adonai Mitchell, not as much of a deep ball guy. It is in his repertoire, but at least in the production last year, it wasn't the same there. Now, other guys who also look good in that respect are some of the guys we've talked about on the show quite a bit. Roman Wilson, actually, of Michigan, caught 6 touchdown passes on deep balls. And was able to corral in about 2/3 of his deep ball receptions. In fact, he caught 12 of his 18 passes there when he was targeted on deep balls, and that's very interesting for a guy who played in an offense that really was all about running the football. And also for a guy who's not that tall, oftentimes you think, hey, who's going to win the deep ball more often? It's probably going to be the really tall, really fast guys. And there's some of those guys out there. But Roman Wilson's one of those guys that I think can be really interesting. Other guys just like him are right around the range of where he caught 6 touchdowns on deep balls. Luke McCaffrey, the younger brother of Christian McCaffrey, caught 7 touchdowns on deep balls. Also, Oregon's Troy Franklin, he also caught 7 touchdowns on deep balls. Brandon Rice also caught 6 touchdowns on deep balls, the son of Jerry Rice there. And that 6 touchdowns on deep passes was the amount of touchdowns that Rome Odunze scored in this past year. So there's a lot of guys here who I think fit the bill. If you wanted to look at pure overall deep ball receptions, the most in the country was Odunze last year. He had 23. Malik Neighbors was next with 19. But right after that, Javon Baker, Brian Thomas Jr., and Marvin Harrison Jr., all with 15 receptions on deep balls. I think it's just something that this group might have a lot of talented players who can feed into that, who can help with that, with those kind of numbers. And other guys like Xavier Legette, also not bad numbers there. Caught 13 of 24 deep balls last year for 554 yards. Also had 4 touchdowns on deep passes. Other names out there, Jalen Polk. He's another guy that had really good numbers. And you go down the line. There's several good options if you're looking at wide receivers in this draft class. One sneaky option that if you look way down at the list, Bub Means, right below Luke McCaffrey on my rankings. He's my 22nd ranked receiver in this draft class right now. I covered Bub Means at Pitt. There's a lot of scouts that I've talked to, and I've said this a number of times to people who listen to me when it comes to Pitt things. But there are a lot of scouts that love Bub Means for his ability to fly downfield with the size that he has, the frame that he has, and the ability he has to make big plays. He might just be a special teamer for now, but his deep ball threat has certainly added more options to his repertoire here. But point being, when we go back and we look at these options here, I think one thing the Steelers are going to want to get is another deep ball threat. And that's not to say George Pickens isn't one. I just think that the way that they're building right now, a deep ball threat type of receiver would make a lot of sense to pair with George Pickens, as the two of them can kind of push defenses back, and defenses have to say, hey, we got to commit to both of these guys because they're that good and they can kill us in one play. Heck, you saw George Pickens do that last year. So I look at these receivers here. I think that there's a lot of potential for finding the right deep ball guys, finding the right guys who can get after it, go win deep ball passes, outrun people, but also out physical people. Those things are bigger deals. But I think it is going to be imperative for the Steelers to make sure that they capitalize on that, because if they're able to get at least one other deep ball receiver, it's going to create a pick your poison situation for facing the Steelers next year. Because if you look at how they're going to try to build, they want to fortify the offensive line, become a dominant run team. And heck, again, in the last 10 games of last season, they were a dominant run team. They were the number 2 rushing team in the NFL during that span. But if you add a deep passing game to that, it changes up everything. It puts a lot more, ingenuity into things. It gives you a chance to kind of try to reset things whenever things are going bad. If you hit on that deep ball, it can change up everything. The Steelers just haven't been that team. And I think that with a Russell Wilson and with a Justin Fields, you got 2 options of guys who want to throw the ball deep and want to be good at throwing the ball deep. And that's where I think that that's where this can be a much bigger deal if the Steelers do this right and set things up and give whoever's their starting quarterback a good look at how to make big plays. I think that could be a really, really good asset for the Steelers moving forward. And part of that also is adding more explosive wide receivers who could be answers in that department. We'll get into some of who those wide receivers are in this draft cast a little bit more as we get into Mock Draft Monday, and I show you who our winner was this week. All that here and more on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. What's the first thing that you'd do if you had an extra hour in your day? Maybe you go for a run, read a book, or be there for a friend. But what about just being there for yourself? That's where therapy can help you find what matters the most to you so you could do more of it. I've benefited from the help of good therapists in my life who've helped me sort through the most important things that I try to balance every single day. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp knows life can be busy and stressful, so it's designed to be suitable for your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. That's BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue talking about this draft class and how the Steelers can go get some explosive wide receivers. Now, we switch over to our mock draft Monday here to talk a little bit. And congratulations to the person who I'm about to announce, but also want to kind of, thank everyone for chipping in and you guys gave me a lot of different options. This week's rules, I gave you a little bit more specific rules because we're getting closer to draft day. I allowed only a max of one trade, and I made sure that said, hey, you got to draft an offensive tackle no later than round 2 and a wide receiver no later than round 3. And a lot of y'all follow the rules. Some weeks that y'all don't follow rules, and I'm like, well, you're just not getting picked if you're not going to follow the rules that I gave you. But a lot of you all did, and I thought there was a really interesting set of picks here. A lot of you guys gave me some interesting things to choose from, especially with when I figured out this is the direction I wanted to talk about for this show, talking about the deep passing. So without any further ado, this week's winner is Luke Malloy, who comes in and hits a lot of the Steelers' needs, follows the rules, but also adds 2 of the players that I've been talking about as far as the deep passing game. Now, it looks like Luke did not do any trades here. At least I don't think off the top. Just looking at things here, but even if whether he did or didn't, the point is that he hit on a lot of hits here. Now, for those who can't see this because you're listening to this on your favorite podcasting app, Luke's picks were in the first round, Marius Mims at 20, getting the Steelers offensive tackle right away. The second round, Zach Frazier at 51, getting the center right after that. And then getting your first wide receiver of this class, Jalen Polk out of Washington. We'll get into his numbers in a bit. Jeremiah with the 98th overall pick in the third round, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. So you get the linebacker with the legacy guy to add to your room that you don't necessarily need him right away for, so he can develop. Then in 119, the fourth round, you get Cam Hart, the cornerback out of Notre Dame, who has really good tape and really good size. I think that's a good thing to get a guy like him. And then your final 2 picks of the draft were Luke McCaffrey and Jordan Travis, the quarterback out of Florida State. So all those being said, the reason that I picked Luke's picks here was because when I looked back and I looked over some of these receivers that he picked out here, I think that one, that's great value for where you're getting receivers in this class. There's still a ton of talent here to tap into. But when I looked at these 2 guys, I thought that these 2 guys were kind of interesting in their numbers. Both are around like a little over 6'1". So they have that going for them. Luke McCaffrey ran a 4.46, Jalen Polk a 4.52, but Jalen Polk also jumped pretty well with a 37.5-inch vertical and a 10, I think it was a 10-foot broad jump there. And I think that's where that's where you can see his explosiveness, his ability to go up and get the football. And then I went back and I looked, I'm like, okay, where do these guys rank when it comes to, deep ball passing? And, it's a little tough with different conferences and everything going on. But Luke McCaffrey, he was tied for the 5th most deep ball touchdowns in college football last year with 7. Right with him, Troy Franklin of Oregon, who I think is also, kind of been underrated in this draft process. And right behind them, Roman Wilson, the guy of Michigan I keep talking about, had 6, tied with Brandon Rice, the son of Jerry Rice, and a few others there, including Rome Odunze. So Luke McCaffrey had more deep ball touchdowns than Rome Odunze this past season. I think that's where you look at and you say, like, hey, can you just hit on one of these guys being deep ball threats? Can you guys, get one factor out of that? If you do that, awesome, you figured it out. But also, I'd like to point out that, part of winning the deep balls is also winning, the tough deep balls, because it's not just as simple as saying, oh, just go deep and throw it to you. Sometimes you got to go win the contested catches. And the one guy, and the reason I think that they kind of sold me on this draft list, Luke Malloy, was Jalen Polk, the wide receiver out of Washington, you drafted with the Steelers' first 3rd round pick this year. when you look at Jalen Polk, he was targeted 28 times on deep passes, caught 14 of them, so a straight 50% rate. Had 567 total yards and 5 touchdowns. Also impressive, there. But I think the most impressive thing was that he had the third most contested catches on deep balls in the entire country, tied with Marvin Harrison Jr. So I think Jalen Polk's a good ad. I think that the reason I picked this draft was because it hit on all the major needs, but it also gave you options at the deep ball with the 2 receivers that Luke drafted here, while also getting your needs. There's a linebacker here. There's a center here. There's a tackle here. There's a corner here. The one thing that's not on this list is a powerful defensive lineman. But as we'll discuss in the coming weeks, I think it's getting harder and harder to complete these cycles of trying to figure out what the Steelers are going to do here, because the position values are changing. I think that and the Steelers practices are changing. So I look at the how they could look at how this board works here, and I look at how other people have their boards. But if the Steelers came out with this draft class, I think everyone should be pretty happy. You want a defensive lineman. You'd want them to be somewhere up in this group, but getting 2 wide receivers, getting a corner, getting a tackle, a center, and even a young quarterback to add to the mix, to me, that would be a heck of a haul in the class if everyone was to work out the way that they kind of project to work out with their skills right now. So again, congrats to our winner this week, Luke Malloy, on the Mock Draft Monday contest. We only have a few more of those, so keep submitting them whenever I put the post. Usually I do so in the Locked On Steelers Facebook group, or I do so on Twitter. If you're down to do it, hit me up with those. I'm always down to just look them over and just think like, okay, that could be cool here, that could be cool there. But bottom line is, I do think the Steelers are trying to set up a deep passing game of some sort. And if they're able to make it work, I think it's going to make this offense a lot more efficient moving forward. We'll see how that happens in the coming weeks as they look to try to get ready for the NFL draft, which starts on April 25th. But that's our show here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. You can also find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, talking about your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.